Thank you for listening to Grilled by the Staff Canteen. I'm Cara, editor of the Staff Canteen, and in this episode I met Josh Niland, Australian chef and author of the book which is the latest craze sweeping through the UK's kitchens. The Whole Fish is a detailed insight into Josh's no-waste philosophy. He wants people to look at a fish beyond the fillet, and to do this he has written a book which inspires chefs and home cooks to push the boundaries creatively and technically when it comes to working with fish. I met Josh for lunch at Mien Tay in Battersea. It was a busy lunch service, so excuse the background noise, but I will take any opportunity to pin a chef down for an interview, even if it involves crashing their lunch plans. He explained why he wanted to write the book, what he hoped people would take from it, and I also put him on the spot and asked him what is sustainability. I know you probably answered this question a lot of times, but why did you want to be a chef to start with?
I don't know, it's probably a similar thing to most chefs. I think we all, I'll talk about myself personally, I love cooking for people, to see them interact with food that you cook for them. It's probably a weird fetish to say that you enjoy watching people eat your food, but hence why I've got an open kitchen at St. Peter. So I like being able to cook people something and then watch them enjoy it, and just the way they eat, and then that'll adapt the way I cook for them as well. But even just growing up as a kid, like cooking mum and dad dinners and things like that, that kind of generosity and care and level of attention to cook food for people that you love and make sure that they have a good time with it. I think it's the greatest form of just that, the care, I suppose, and generosity and value that goes into the food, and then watch people that you love eat it. And I think that's why I started cooking in general. Just
I read in your book that fish for you wasn't a focus when you were a kid, though.
Not
you
at all.
had like tinned fish and stuff like that. So
grew up around mum having tinned tuna on like white bread with cheese on top of it, and tinned salmon salads and white anchovies at like a fancy cafe around the corner and stuff. So fish to me was literally what came out of a can. So, and I mean, when it wasn't that, then it was fish that we caught in the local river, which was, wasn't like a habitual routine of going fishing. It was like when mum had had enough of us mucking around at home, she'd be like, all right, let's get you to go down and catch some fish. So, we'd catch anything from boots to eels to turtles to, flathead. So sometimes we got some really nice fish, and then we'd take it home and put flour on it and pan fry it, and don't take any bones out of it because that was too much work, and then, that was it. So I was very much not a child that was born on a wharf eating beautiful fish on white bread sandwiches. It was more of a necessity-based thing. And if it wasn't caught by us, then it was eating it out of a tin. So I had no bearings that tuna was, this big thing, and I didn't know that salmon was, a pink fish, or I had no idea.
Which is mad to think what you do now.
Yeah.
That is so far from
totally.
From
and even like asparagus and stuff, I had no idea that asparagus was fresh. I just knew it as the stuff in the jar that mum used to have out of a jar. So like all the not pickled stuff, but the boiled stuff in a jar. So it's cool.
So when did you realise that that cooking was a passion for you, or ingredients was something that you really wanted to know more about?
I started working at a cafe when I was 14 and 9 months, when you're legally allowed to start working.
So I was say that's very specific.
14 and 9 months I was chewing at the bit to take a job, so I went into a cafe in the local supermarket, and it was just a standard cafe, but the good thing was I started washing dishes for like the first 6 months, and by washing dishes you could watch how everything kind of works systematically in a kitchen, even though it was like grilled sandwiches and heating up soup and doing cafe stuff. It was still interesting to watch how a kitchen worked. So I'd wash dishes, I'd make coffees, I'd run food, I'd take orders, and then when I got the call up to go into the kitchen to, pull the bread press down on a sandwich, it was like the best thing ever. But I suppose that starting, so not detached from food, but starting a little bit outside of food and in that kind of, more not the rubbish jobs, but taking bins out and like doing the washing up and all that sort of stuff. You learn the details of everything else that's going on indirectly. So I enjoyed that part of it, and then it was so you're craving to start touching food eventually. So
Yeah.
eventually then when they let you do it was so exciting.
Yeah.
And I said to my mum and dad, when I was 15, I was nearly 16, I said, I really want to be a chef, and can I leave school and do it as an apprenticeship and start doing it full time? They were all backed me to do it. So
Yeah.
I started doing it, and I worked in a restaurant in Newcastle, which is a half an hour drive from where I grew up, and it was on the water. And it was a modern Australian restaurant.
What's
which get,
modern Australian?
Yeah, exactly. It still gets thrown around now, and it's the most throwaway comment. So, lots of seafood, salt and pepper squids, and, grilled salmon and, prawn risotto. Just funny things that were very popular at that time. But very fortunate to work with a menu that had like 10 dishes on it, and they were all different proteins and all different vegetables. We made bread, we made butter, we made we shucked oysters, we did all these different things, made mayonnaise, and I feel like working in that place, which was quite a humble beginning, but it still, there was a lot of care and attention to detail. I feel like working in somewhere like that to begin with put me in great position moving forward, because I feel like if I started in Sydney, in the top end, most likely to a degree to get chewed up and spat out, because you need this basin of technique, I suppose, or like you need a certain level of attention put on you when you're 15, 16 years old to make sure that you understand the real basic fundamentals of cooking.
Okay.
And I feel like if I was to skip that part, you develop bad habits, and I think that time was very formative.
Yeah.
So, and then I moved to Sydney when I was 17.
Okay.
Having been offered a job when I was 16 and a half by a big name chef in Sydney, he said, come and work for us, and I said, oh, absolutely. So I was very fortunate, like I got to work with this really great chef in an event, without telling the whole long story of it, but I got to work with a great chef at a special event, and he said, come.
Which chef was that?
Peter Doyle.
Okay.
And so I worked for him for a number of years later, but when I met him at such a young age, he said, you should come work for us. And I was like, yes, absolutely, I will. And then I went home and I said, Mum, I'm going to move to Sydney and stuff. She's like, no, you're not. You can't leave. You haven't even turned 17. And so anyway, and I felt like I was doing a disservice to the people in my first restaurant that I worked at, that I wasn't going to commit to full 12 months, and I felt like it'd be a bit of a slap in the face to leave after such a short time. So finished the year there, went to Sydney, I couldn't work for that chef at that time because they just won Restaurant of the Year in Sydney and 3 Hats and all this sort of stuff, and so everybody wanted to work there. And so I called him up and I said, I'm going to come and work for you now, Peter. And he goes, we don't have any space for chef. So I'm like, bugger.
Oh.
So I took a job at another restaurant, which was at the Hilton Hotel in the city, and that was Luke Mangan at Glass Brasserie, and literally a 240-seat brasserie. There was all French, and it was intense.
Yeah.
Like it was proper section hierarchy, all things that I hadn't done in Newcastle.
Okay.
Like there was a cold section, an oyster section, a bloody vegetable
system,
section. Like it was insane. Like it was insane for a 17-year-old to be running around, 18 hours a day. Like, it was a different scale as well. Like, you put a batch of mashed potato on, it's 50 kilos of potatoes. And then you take 15 kilos of the mash out to make potato gnocchi with in the same, 1 hour that you've got to get that done. So it was very, I learned how to work faster. I learned how to be better organised. I learned how to work under pressure, because there was a lot of pressure, because I was only 12 months old when I started working there. So I feel very lucky to have worked there, because I got to work with Luke Mangan as well, who's a bit of a brand in Sydney. Mm-hmm. So I feel like Joe Pavlovich, the chef there, was more formative with my cooking technique and working in a kitchen side by side every day, whereas Luke wasn't there as much, but he'd take me to the local news studio where he would do his morning cooking show, and I would prepare his food for that cooking show. So I'd wake up really early, make all these ingredients, and then we'd arrive out there to do this show, and it was my opportunity to get a half an hour in his car with him talking about things in general. And he'd hop back into the car and kind of say, oh, that went well, or that didn't go well, and I'd ask him why. And it was really interesting conversations a lot of the time, because I don't feel like I would have got that if it was just turning up for work. Because he was literally would blow in and out of services because he had so much on.
So you made the most of that one-on-one time.
100%. So yeah.
Yeah. So where or when did the love of like the fish and that come from? And initially, I'm assuming you didn't see it as the whole fish. Or initially, it was another ingredient, and then have you developed it into that?
Yeah. When I worked at Est, eventually with Peter Doyle, where I was saying I wanted to work in the beginning, I eventually got there, and I just looked at the fish section as being this, holy grail section that was like the most intelligent, switched on, sharpest knife wielding person was the one who got to do that section. And in a section in a kitchen at that time that was so elite, somewhat, where all the chefs in the kitchen were nearly sub 25 years old, we were all ready to kill one another to try and get on the best section. So the fish section always had this thing about it that I was quite fascinated by, because it was so difficult. Like, the fragility of fish and how quick, the time was from getting the fish in to then it spoiling, and how you can manage, looking after the fish and cooking it well and all that sort of stuff. I found that quite fascinating. And eventually I just got to the point where I'm like, I really want to focus on fish, and I would love to see another restaurant where I can actually wholeheartedly focus just on fish, because I just like the look of that section so much. So I went and worked at a place called Fish Base, and a very small restaurant, same size as what I have now, 34 seats.
Yep.
And it was run by, quite easily one of the most technically correct fish chefs in the country, which is Stephen Hodges. And he taught me so much about where to find it, how to handle it, what fridge to use, like all of that stuff. So all the basic, slightly Frenchified European style way of way of cooking fish and building dishes. But I suppose what made him very unique and special was how, he knew a method of cookery for just about every single species of fish that came through the door. So, and to be his, I suppose, second chef, I felt very fortunate to have all that information pouring onto me.
So fundamentally, your ethos stems from there, and then you
partly.
developed it.
Like I feel like that real solid, practicalities of what to do with a fish when it comes through the door, and then what to do with all the secondaries. So like if you've cut your fillet and you sell 16 out of 20, what do you do with the other 4 the next night?
Yeah.
Like, do you put it on again, or do you, I don't know, do you use it for staff meal? How do you use it? And so we'd make like fish cakes and fish fingers and all that sort of stuff out of it. And it was just a good acumen to learn what to do with the little bits and pieces that were left over. We'd never delve into offal or anything like that, because that wasn't an agenda of the restaurant at the time, because it wasn't the demographic.
Yeah. And
I don't think Stephen had a great care to want to use that stuff, probably because of the time and all that. So it was a great place to work. It was a very difficult place to work, because he was a very intense character. And I mean, you don't know him, but if you bring his name up in conversation in Australia, they're like, "Oh, you work for him, did you?" And it's always a bit like, "Oh, wow, okay, are you okay?" But all the noise aside, he was a very good teacher to me. And I feel like I took the best from him.
Yeah.
Some people took the worst from him. And I feel like I was quite special in the fact that I didn't engage with all the nonsense that went on. And I took a lot from that experience. Yeah. So then why I love fish so much is because it's so hard. Like, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to find. It's very difficult to, get other people to do the way you want it to be done as well. And I suppose at St. Peter, when we opened it, I started with 3 chefs, and then we doubled the chefs 6 months later, just because it was exhausting, and we'd become quite popular in the beginning, and lots of people were coming. So a 34-seat restaurant that used to do 45 on a busy night, we started doing 75, 80, and it was hard, especially with the limitations with the kitchen that we had. Still have, and it's like 1 stove, 1 oven, 1 deep fryer with 2 baskets in it, and that's it. So there's no kit, there's no fluff and whistles to make it all work. It's real cooking. I don't know if people say that a lot, but it was it's very, Adrian, who's sitting across from me now, he's worked for me at St. Peter, and it's like the level of compromise that you have to deal with in that kitchen is tremendous, but that gives birth to so much, so many ideas and so many thoughts, and like you. So it was wonderful, but like 6 months in, we doubled the staff, and 6 months in from September meant we were going into the cooler months, and we lost the shine of being that brand new restaurant that everybody needed to go to. So it kind of didn't taper off lots, but it kind of trimmed back a bit in numbers. And I had all these extra chefs, so wage cost went to like 48%.
Okay.
It's horrible. And then
I can see the pain
we watched the food cost though come back down sub 28%, which dealing with premium Australian fish was, amazing, because majority of the time my food cost was around 32-33% using, really amazing premium fish. So to get the food cost down that far meant obviously something was happening with the food. And what that was, all this extra labour that we had, was finally questioning why there was this habitual routine of just cutting the head off and putting it in the bin and like just belting through the fish prep, just because that's the task. Like, I think all of our mentors that have gone before us, and I'll talk about Tom Brown in this as well, like Tom worked for Nathan worked for Rick. Like, there's this line of training that's happened along the years where we would never question our mentors as to why they do certain things. You just do the job and you get it done. And fish has got this elitist stigma around it about it's so expensive. If you're the head chef or sous chef, you're allowed to cut the fish, but if you're anything under that, you don't even think about touching the fish because that's not your job. You can scale and gut it for me, but I'll put the knife through it. And I feel like that has put limitations over the evolution of fish in the Western world, because Eastern cultures and African and Middle Eastern celebrate the whole fish and they'll eat the whole thing. But how does that translate to English palate? How does that translate to an Australian palate, American? Like, how do we find it desirable to eat a fish eye? Or how do we overcome this hurdle of eating fish liver? Because everybody throws into that fish guts bin, and then it's kind of like, oh, no thanks, because a fish fillet is already confrontational enough to a lot of people. Using fish in general is just such a confrontational thing to begin with, and to kind of throw my hat in the ring and say, no, you can eat everything, it's kind of like, what? So to turn like a prawn cracker the idea of a prawn cracker, and to substitute the prawn then for fish eyes, it makes fish eyes crunchy, salty, deep fried, like all of those things that Western people just tick off in their head going like yum, yum, yum. But ultimately it's a fish eye. We take fish sperm and we make it into a mortadella sausage. Like, we take fish blood and we make it into black pudding.
I have had that, but not in a nice way. I went to Norway, and they eat all of everything of the scray cod. And one of the delicacies was that, and it was literally just, they boil it. They just boil everything.
Exactly.
And I was like, no, I'll try it, but it's not for
and
me.
And the same for Japanese. Like, you have the shirako, like the fish milt, poached in a miso soup. How is it that I would get my mother, or like of any close friends of mine back in Australia, to eat that with great confidence and find it really yummy and delicious, and I really need another one of them? They're not. Like, I mean, me personally, I would like to experience it, but I wouldn't be like, let's have another one of them. Like, we make a banh mi sandwich at Fish Butchery, which is like a Vietnamese bread roll with traditionally with pork liver pate in it, and usually roast pork or like a mortadella, and then lots of veggies and things. So we took the idea of a banh mi sandwich and we made it with fish liver pate, fish sperm mortadella, and then all the other traditional vegetables that go into it. Now you've got people in Paddington walking into Fish Butchery for their lunch break, and they're like, can we get 2 banh mi sandwiches please? And like, they get it, and I'm literally watching them walk out the door eating it, laughing and happy, and off they go, and I'm like, this is so weird that people have normalised eating this offal, like, and I think that's wonderful.
Thanks for listening to this episode so far. We took a quick break to eat noodle soup, but we went straight back in with Josh explaining why he opened his shop, Fish Butchery. For the purposes of people listening, we've had lunch.
Yes, we have.
So we're going to go back to Fish Butchery.
Yes.
Talk me through that concept and why you wanted to do that as well as the restaurant, because it's completely different.
Completely. So we, like I said, we had this little restaurant in Paddington. It was 34 seats, used to be a sushi train, and we got quite popular and busy, and so 34 turned into busy 75, 80. So literally we run out of space for the talent that we had in the room, and we'd run out of space for fish in the fridge, and just everything about it was just getting a bit too tight. And so the natural progression for most chefs at that time is to, okay, let's open another restaurant and let's expand on it. And everybody was kind of suggesting we do St. Peter 2 somewhere else in Sydney, and I didn't like the sound of that, just because I felt like there was this pressure for me to be at one of them, and then if I wasn't at the other one, then it would be like, is Josh cooking my dinner tonight? And I'm not, so so I found that quite difficult. And then as well, Julie and I had a conversation about it. Julie's my wife. We kind of said the second business that we do needs to complement the first one, and it needs to make the first one easier or simpler. So then it was basically, where is a venue along the strip that we're on that we could take over and turn it into ultimately a prep kitchen, like a production kitchen. But how can we justify a production kitchen if it can't sustain its own, putting lots of chefs in there and buying more and more fish? How do you offset that luxury, I suppose? So then we decided we'd do a revised model of a fish shop where it had a retail position with the locals being able to come in and buy fish, but as well a wholesale one where we supply to other restaurants, and a dine-in and takeaway menu that would be able to have the more simpler casual fish dishes, which obviously I wanted to eventually take off the menu at St. Peter, because St. Peter was morphing into something with greater expectation beyond fish and chips and those simpler things. So the idea as well with Fish Butchery was to really look at what a fish shop was and why people didn't like using them, or why we kind of felt confronted by it. And I felt like it was because it was too cold, it was too wet, like there was water on the floor usually. You never really got to have a decent chat with anybody. It was always kind of head down, what do you want? And you take the fillets off the ice that it was sitting on and stuff. So I thought, let's put all chefs in the kitchen, and let's make it a big marble counter in the middle of the room that's literally this huge table that we're all working around, with no barriers that customers feel like they have to look behind something to see what the action is behind. I wanted it to be all open, and Julie, my wife, she designed the way it would look and stuff, and it was beautiful what we ended up with. And instead of that traditional ice well with all the fillets on top of it, we ended up with this Tiffany's-esque big jewellery box at the front of the room, this big glass box with all our fish in there. And the idea was to only put one fillet or one portion of each fish that we had in the house that day in this box. So like I said, instead of having these piles of fillets lined up, which people obviously at times you've seen go to the fish shop and go, oh, can I have that one? And then they're like, this one? They're like, no, that one. And then you have to kind of lift through all these fish. So I really wanted the presentation of the shop to represent one species of fish perfectly to suit a domestic cooking environment. So there's no point having this big side of salmon in the front window when maybe some people don't have a big oven at home, maybe they've just got one pan. So we portion cut everything into something we feel brings desirability to the product. And then when people come in, the first question is always, is that all you've got? Because there's literally only one of each, and it's like, well, no, no, there's not. So we've got the cool room out at the back of at the butchery. It's at the back, but we've got drawers at our legs where we take fish from the drawers. And literally, when people ask for, oh, can I get some kingfish or can I get some bass or something, then we'll cut that fish off the bone, and then we'll portion it exactly as to what they want and how they want to cook it. And oftentimes people have no bearings about what method they're going to use, because not a lot of people have that acumen of beyond pan frying. It's always just either pan fry or bake it in the oven. So we try to suggest, because we're all chefs there, I try to suggest a cooking time, a cooking temperature, a flavour profile as to what you can pair with the veggies, like with the fish, and what kind of veggies you can use. And that helps overcome big hurdles for a lot of people. And the wonderful thing as well is some of the customers now are actually diarising what they're taking and what temperatures we're saying, what times we're saying, and what vegetables we're suggesting. And then they'll go home and do it, and then they'll come back and go, that was amazing. And then they'll kind of put a big tick in their notes saying this worked. So then next time you get that fish in, then I'm going to do that again. And it's wonderful that people are engaging with it that thoroughly. Other times you got people coming in just going, can I get one piece of ocean trout? And it's like, sure. And I want there to be as much enthusiasm to those customers purchasing one fillet of fish as there is to somebody that comes in and goes, oh, can I have a swordfish T-bone, and can I have fish sausages, and can I have the charcuterie and all this stuff. I don't want that kind of feeling of that upsell all the time like that, because I don't know, it wears thin on people very quickly, and I understand how expensive fish is. And if you're going to invest in a piece of fish, you need to be going home with the right kind of tools and the right information so that you can do your money justice. And as well, we check every single fish that comes through the door. Like, we cut a bit out of the tail, we cook it, we taste it, we work out if it's a soft fish, if it's a tough fish, and if it is, then we don't sell it in that way. We'll find another way to use it up, but we don't send people off with average fish, because it's, like I said, it's such an investment of money and time to go to a fish shop, buy something for your dinner, and then have a good experience with it.
And everything you're saying, I think it leads on nicely to the book,
Yeah.
The Whole Fish, and because I think all of that, what you've just said, is throughout
The book.
throughout the book. So why did you want to do a book, and are you surprised by the reaction from chefs in the UK? Because when you sent the book out, it went mad on social media. So did you expect that reaction?
I was, to touch on why I wanted to write a book, it's your bucket list as a little boy wanting a restaurant one day, and then you want to write a book one day as well, but it's whether or not you can make that happen. So I'm very, very proud that, Julie and I have opened this restaurant, and it's gone really well. And then the shop was something fairly outlandish to most, to think that we could make a fish shop work on Oxford Street in Paddington, which has usually been a fashion strip, and then all of a sudden we're making, fish fashionable. So we're very, we're not, we work really hard on what we do, and we're just happy with the way it's going. But I felt like there was a certain momentum that was saying I wanted to write a book. And it was a funny story that when Hardy Grant came to me and said, would you like to write a book with us? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And it all looked good. And Jane Wilson, the publisher over there, she said to me, when do you want to have this book out? And I said, September. And then she's like, September's a great time. It's just before Christmas. It'll be perfect. And then later in the chat, she said September 2020. And I'm like, no. It's got to be it's got to be 2019. And she's like, okay. How much have you written? And I said, none. And then she's like, right. And she goes, well, for a release date of that, then your deadline would be January 14. And this was a week into November last year. And my newest daughter, Sophie, she was born in December. So there was a birth of a new child and a book being written all at the same time. As good things tend to happen, it's always that they all happen at once.
Like a challenge,
yeah.
obviously.
And so I think in total it was about 8 or 9 weeks that it took to write the book from start to finish. And then we shot the book in 2 separate occasions, one 7-day period and then another 4 days, so it was 11 days. And I felt like all the people that worked on the book were all at the very top of their game. I kind of always say that, but I feel like the photographer was just so wonderful, Robert Palmer. He felt a little bit daunted by looking at my Instagram to begin with, how am I going to reproduce these shots that he's taken? And I think the big agenda was to say, I don't want you to recreate it because I don't want people to feel like they've already scrolled through it. I need people to feel like that it's a unique book that's got its own style, but it's complementary to what we do. And I think the main brief to everybody was that the book was a dry book. It needed to feel dry. It needed to not have an aroma of fish, because I feel like sometimes when you pick a book up, especially a fish book, it's got an odour to it, because there's so much water and there's shots of fish on ice and boats and seaweeds and all this sort of stuff, and it's just connotations of, the ocean, which is great, but I needed this to feel a little bit more tactile and linear and just be more dry. And so they nailed it in terms of that. And then in regards to everybody's kind of excitement around it, we're living in a time of Instagram being so, powerful. It's a very powerful tool, and it's making information so easy to access. And I mean, Tom Brown from Cornerstones, it's wonderful to have conversations back and forth with him about what he's doing in England, and then, you know, Nathan Outlaw and all these guys that love fish deeply, and they all want to express themselves in new ways and all this sort of stuff. And then it's lovely to have offered up something different within their field, and to see them get excited about it, so flattering and like wonderful. And I feel like fish in general is one of those things that we can all access, but we've never kind of looked at it differently. And I feel like the book needed to be written to bring fish up to date with all the techniques and everything that everybody's done over the course of the last at least 25 years, like through the periods of El Bulli and like Noma and, you know, even Fat Duck and Restaurant Gordon Ramsay and all these great institutions that we all celebrate. Everybody's had a certain niche and a special thing that's made them unique, and I feel like, you know, to do this with fish now is quite extraordinary, and it's a lot of fun, really.
And you say in the book that obviously there's a lot of these techniques that they focus on meat but not focus on fish. So some of the things that are in your book, people may be a little bit apprehensive about trying. There's parts of fish that they probably, like you said earlier, that would just go in the bin. So like how much trial and error goes into that? Because there must be some things that you've thought, oh, that'll work, and then it's awful.
It sounds really arrogant and pretentious, but I turned up one morning saying I want to make a prawn cracker out of eyeballs, and I made it and it worked, and I was like, oh, well, that's good, and then put it on the menu straight away, and it was delicious. So there's some things that work as easily as that, where you conceptualize something in your mind and then you just cook it the most obvious way possible, and then it works. Some things, you know, don't. There's a lot of difficulties with using fish offal for charcuterie, like for taking, you know, this fish milt, the sperm of the fish, and making a sausage that's consistent out of it. Like sometimes it's grainy, other times it's beautiful, and it took a long time for us to get a very consistent product out of that. Even fish black pudding, like it took a while to work out a good ratio of fat to add into it, because fish blood is so much leaner than pork blood, and it sets differently. And so, but there's so much from the meat world that you can put into the fish world, and a lot of the times when you join the dots correctly, it works exactly the same, and that's really exciting as well. What else?
What inspires you then? Because there's things in there that are just genius. So like fish Wellington or the sausage rolls and things like that.
Like even the turducken. Like the turducken was probably the hardest recipe in the book. Like on the surface, because it's a fish inside a fish inside a fish. But there's good humour in it as well. But I feel like that's the idea with the book, is to, yes, it's for chefs. Obviously, there's a lot in there for chefs, but at the same time, I feel like there's so much in there for the home cook. And if you can't take much from the home cook away from it, then there's some good humour in there and just a new way of looking at it slightly. But the main agenda was to just literally try to look at it more like meat. Like anatomically speaking, a fish's makeup is so similar to an animal, and like fish racks and like little cutlets, and, you know, putting fish liver on toast and making terrines out of the head. And I feel like to a degree it's a logical step forward. People say game changing and all this sort of stuff. It's very flattering, but there's a lot of information out there, and I feel like I have access to a lot, and I can just bring it all together into this little nugget that now is what we do.
I suppose as a society, those, the offal and things, even in meat, is something that we moved away from, and now is kind of coming back. So how do you is just doing what you do, breaking down those barriers and like making people realise that it's fine to eat that?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's taken Fergus 25 years to celebrate the whole pig, and he's normalised offal and secondary cuts of animals into mainstream supermarkets. And I mean, I feel like I'm right at the beginning of what I do, and I hope that in 25 years I've had the same impact in the fish world as what Fergus has in the meat world. My agenda is to stop putting fish in the bin, and to hopefully inspire others to stop putting literally over half of the fish in the bin. I don't know how, as a Western society, we've normalised the amount of waste that we all looking like we're all just tossing so much into the bin, and it's fairly frightening. Like, I mean, I just did an event in Brisbane back home. For 95 people, I used 8 fish for that event. If I worked off the old logic, I would have needed 16 fish.
Okay.
Because I'm able to achieve 91% yield from a fish as opposed to 45. So double the amount of fish, and then that would have serviced that 95 people. But given what I was doing, I used the stomach, I used the eyes, I used the liver, I used the roe, bones, blood, everything.
And to put it into context, what sort of fish was that? Because obviously you're saying 8 fish, but what was that?
Like it was called cobia. So cobia is like a kingfish, and kingfish over here. Adrian, what's kingfish like over here? No idea.
We don't have many pelagic species, so
Yeah.
it's hard to give a comparison.
Yeah, it's tricky to, like, it's, like, I mean, it was about a 6 kilo fish, 6 to 7 kilo fish, but, you know, quite a lean fish, but, like, it's quite a dense fish as well. But, yeah, it's like I could have used any round fish, really, and done the same thing. But I just think the agenda must be to make things yummy. It can't be confrontational and like, wow, that guy's a freak, and like that's really weird, and I don't know about that, and make people uncomfortable or belittle people. The main priority is to just make sure they feel comfortable. They have a bit of humour in terms of visibility. I play with a little bit of nostalgia in the sense that, you know, crumb sardine sandwich, like a little fish finger sandwich kind of thing, but you're using lovely sardines that you've gone to the trouble of taking all the bones out of and crumbing them, and, you know, there's so much value in the preparation of fish that can be seen by the customer. And in the book, I feel like there's a huge amount of technique in there, but I hope that it's understated. Like, I hope that it's kind of like, oh wow, the King George whiting Kiev, and there's garlic butter coming out of a fish. Like, it looks very simple, and like quite the stylist for the book to just cut it in half and see the butter run out of it instead of serving it whole. Like, I think there's more confrontation when something's whole and untouched and just there in all its glory, as opposed to roughing it up, like putting a chop in it and making it feel a bit more relaxed. So I feel like, yeah, busted egg yolks, fish cut in half, and, you know, big table spreads in the book where there's wine getting poured and things has really softened the chefy, techie, geeky side of the book. Yeah, so I feel it walks a good line.
Yeah. I think you're the perfect person to ask on a very topical subject. What is sustainability?
Yeah.
It's one of them buzzwords, isn't it? And
Totally.
do people know?
No,
or
so
do you just say it because it's the right word to say?
They do. Like, sustainability gets thrown around like fresh fish. So it's the most overused word, but it is relevant. I feel like back home in Australia, sustainability and like fish management and you know, the laws that we all abide by back home, where Australia is like the benchmark globally for sustainable fisheries management. Like, the system basically says you are guilty until you can prove your innocence. So if you're out there taking the wrong things out of the water, or you're in the wrong location, or if you're doing the wrong thing, you will literally get reprimanded severely. And like, even like on the recreational guys as well, both recreational and commercial, it's so tightly watched, and anything that goes through the Sydney fish market is like fine-tooth comb checked, you know. And I work with a number of fishermen direct from all over the country, and it's wonderful that they're out there catching fish one at a time on the line, or through these wonderful new kind of ring nets that they've developed, where the ring size is exacting to the size of the fish that they're targeting, and so then if they don't fit in the net, they swim through because, you know, the size that they've done. So yeah, like sustainability, the way that I look at it, it comes from a culinary acumen, which is to not put fish in the bin. So if I take an amount of fish, then I make sure we do everything in our power to only have very little wastage, and to make sure that we're showing people that there's diversity in fish species outside of salmon, barramundi, mulloway, like things like that back home that you literally see on every single menu. I try to make sure there's a diverse amount of species getting offered and celebrated, so that then there's a trickle-down effect into other restaurants and into people's homes. Because if we keep eating the same species, obviously it puts pressure on the stocks, it puts pressure on prices, and they go through the roof. Aquaculture is extremely important, like when it comes to farming of fish. I feel like fish farming is so important moving forward, but I also think that fish farms maybe need to work closer with chefs to build diets in a more specific way, so that the fish taste more of what their wild self would have been, as opposed to building them for a commercial palate, which is full of grain in their feed and all that sort of stuff, which is fattening them up and creating this fish that then goes under your grill at home. And even if you overcook the hell out of it, it's still got moisture and fattiness to it because of what it's been fed on.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can look at that from positive and negative, but I feel like the taste of a fish from the wild is just far superior. It's far more delicious, far more special, and also looking at it more of a seasonal luxury as opposed to a consistent commodity that you can just be purchased whenever you want. And to go into the mindset of, asparagus at the beginning of spring for us and stone fruit at the beginning of summer, you love that toxic aroma of of a peach smelling like roses, and asparagus that's just juicy and wonderful. But ask any Australian what the best time for a John Dory is, or a herring or something. I don't think majority of people would be able to tell you, just because it's so, we just buy what's in front of us. We don't go out of our way to celebrate the season. So yeah.
And it's important in the book, you do suggest different species of fish that maybe you can't that you can't get hold of.
I tried really hard to make sure that we looked at Atlantic fish as well, just so that it wasn't this Australian centric book. I feel very fortunate to be here now in England, getting to cut into some of these fish, because I've never cut into an English fish before. The first one I ever did was a sea bass a couple of days ago, and then I did this mackerel on Saturday Kitchen this morning. That was brilliant. It's funny how similar certain things are, and then how different some things are as well, and how different the very cold water that's up here is to then the slightly warmer ones back in Australia. So,
and obviously you're doing a masterclass for chefs tomorrow. So what exactly are you going to be doing, and why did you want to do that?
Yeah, because I'm scared shitless of being able to cook for them, so I'd prefer to just get them to watch me as opposed to cooking for them. No, but I'm really excited to get a fish. I've literally started working with Johnny at Flying Fish, and Tom's advice and Nathan's advice to work with him. But I literally said, I'll take whatever you got. I don't mind what it is. And I just want to get in front of a group of chefs and just try to remove some of the confrontation that might be there from the book or from my Instagram or something. It all comes across quite glamorous and stuff, but I feel like there's a big void of information missing, and I feel like you can only get that when you get in front of people and you can show them the intricacies of how to pull it apart. So it was really to try to give them some information, some tangible information that they can take back and hopefully implement into their restaurants, because it only takes one little cut and to hold something up and go, and I use this for this, to trigger somebody's brain to go, fuck, I've been throwing that in the bin for the past 10 years. I would have never thought to have used that. And if we can have that kind of enthusiasm, then everybody's going to walk away from it thinking it was great. But I like that educational side of it, and I like being able to interact with my peers and people who I've had on a pedestal for so long. So.
Did you have in your mind an idea of the chefs you wanted there to experience that? Are they all chefs with a fish background, or are they across the board?
It's pretty broad, but to have people like Nathan and Brett Graham and Tom and Matt Abey from Restaurant Gordon Ramsay, it does come off like a bit of the who's who of the English food world, but I feel like it's a good mix of people that'll all appreciate the craft, I suppose, of what I do, and the practical techniques that, like I said, can be implemented the next day at their restaurant if they wanted to. So, but it is a very diverse group of people, and I think we even have a few fishmonger, few fish people coming along that literally can use that information as well. So, yeah.
And in terms of the book, people who read your book, what ideally do you want them to take away from the book?
In a nutshell, without talking like a lunatic like I've just done for the last hour, in a nutshell, it's to look at a fish. It's to look at a fish beyond the fillet. Like, there needs to be a conversation now that there is so much more to a fish than just the fillet, and literally to stop, just stop, like, and look at it logically. And it's a good thought to think about. If you walked into any butcher shop anywhere in the world, would you ever see somebody cutting apart a beef carcass, a lamb carcass, a pork carcass, and then dip that piece of meat in water in front of you, and then pull it back out, and then cut portions of it, and then put it in the window? It's absurd. Like, you would never see anybody cutting a sirloin steak off a bone and then dipping it in water to clear off any impurities and any bits and pieces, and then cut a steak and then pop it in the window and then sell it. Like, you can't say to me that it's the same, but it's different because it's fish and they live in water and all this sort of stuff. Water is what's killing the shelf life. Water is the main issue with how people are handling fish. Water and ice. Not many people, and this is part of the conversation tomorrow that I want to do, and it's every fish has this porous scale which sits along the red muscle of the fillet, and that porous scale is sucking water in, like, in a good way, in the water. It's taking nutrients from the water through this porous scale to power the actual fish. But when it comes out and you put tap water on it that's sitting at 14 degrees most times, and even higher than that, or ice, it's literally like a sponge. It's taking on all this water, and where you think you're doing the right thing, where you're washing away impurities and bacteria and stuff, you're promoting bacteria growth. And
something that people probably are not aware of at all.
And you wrap a fish in cling wrap, you're creating this horrible atmosphere where fish is sitting in its own sweat, and it's just getting worse and worse. So the second you put water on a fish, the second you take a fillet off the bone, you end up with something that's got a time bomb ticking on it that 2 days later you will have to start using more lemon juice than you ever have to offset that ammonia smell. So, because I could talk all day about this, but like, what's most interesting is fish have an organic compound in them called trimethylamine, and when a fish dies, that converts into trimethylamine oxide, and then once that trimethylamine oxide breaks down, it converts into ammonia, and then ammonia is only offset by using acidic compounds, and that's the reason why we've got like a repertoire of dishes which are acidic based for fish. So hollandaise, half a lemon, tomato concasse, like all these acidic wine sauces that we put with fish. We're building these dishes with acidic like ingredients so that we're waiting for the time when they'll help off. To only use like paper to wipe it out and to keep it dry, you'll have a fish that will last up to 2 to 3 weeks without the use of any salt. You'll have something texturally that will probably be firmer and more delicious. All the glutamates in the fish will make the fish more savoury and more yummy. And I just think there's so much that we're not looking at, and the more I can talk about it and get in front of chefs and things like we'll do tomorrow and next week, hopefully it ticks a few boxes and joins a few dots for people so that they can look at it a bit differently.
So how does it feel when you see, obviously on social media, people like replicating or trying to do what you do? Do you feel like you're getting somewhere with it?
Totally. Like, I mean, in the early days, seeing people hold fish on hooks was a little bit like, okay. But because earlier on, I held up a fish on a hook when I first started saying that I was going to dry edge a fish, and all these people called me an idiot and told me I was stupid and stuff. So it's good to now see globally that it's somewhat been normalised into most kitchens now. I have a look around, people hanging their fish on hooks and things, and that's quite cool to see that you've made a little bit of an impression with some people, and they can see the logic behind it as well. But I love watching people doing similar things to what we do. I love seeing Tom making charcuterie out of fish, like things that we started looking at, he may have started looking at the same time, and it's hugely flattering to see the ripple effect of what we're doing.
So finally, what's next then? What haven't you done with fish that you want to do with fish?
really invest a lot of time and thinking into the steakhouse of fish. So that's my next plan. Yeah, like, the traditional steakhouse that everybody knows and loves all through America and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, how do we evolve the business into something that is a steakhouse but of fish? So I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Ta.
We hope you enjoyed this interview, and if you have any comments, feel free to tweet us or comment on the post. We're making all of our interviews available to download. And finally, if you like what we do, whether it's our podcast or our videos or even our features, please head over to our Patreon page and support us there.